This video is on Algebra 2 IXL topic L1, roots of integers. So remember, an integer is a positive or negative whole number. So the counting numbers, but including the negative numbers as well. So here we're going to find the real number root. So when you want to find the square root of 4, remember, you're asking yourself, what times itself equals 4? So the answer is 2. 2 times 2 equals 4. All right, what's the square root of 16? What times itself equals 16? That's right, 4 times 4 is 16. Now here you see that this problem looks a little different. What is different about this problem? Well, it's this number right here next to the radical sign. So here we want to find the cube root, not the square root, the cube root of -1. Now this yellow number right here, this number here is called the index. So whenever you look at this, this could be a 3 or a 4 or a 5. In this case, the index is a 3, and we call it a cubed root. So what this is asking you is what times itself 3 times would make -1. Now notice that the index is odd, and what's inside of the radical is negative. That's because when you multiply a negative number an odd number of times, the negative will still be there. -1 times -1 times -1 equals -1. A negative times a negative is a positive, but then you're still multiplying by a negative once more, so your answer is going to be negative. So what number do we multiply by itself 3 times to make -1? Well, that's just -1. What about a positive number? So let's go ahead and look at this problem. Here we have the cube root of +8. What number times itself 3 times equals 8? Well, let's see. 4 times 4 would be 16. That would be too big. 3 times 3 would be 9 already. No. What about 2 times 2 times 2? 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So the cube root of 8 is 2. All right, how about this one? This one's a little bit trickier. Now, there are a couple of patterns that you can start looking for, right? Whenever a number ends in a 5, that's a good idea that we're multiplying by something that ends in a 5. So what's the cube root of 125? Well, if you break this down, you can just guess and check and start thinking, what are numbers that would multiply to have 5 at the end? And if you try 5 times 5, what's 5 times 5? 25. And then if you multiply that by 5 again, if you have 5 quarters, 5 times 25, you have $1.25. That equals 125. So what number times itself 3 times equals 125? Well, that number is 5. This is the cube root. This is the cube root of 125. I'm just writing it out so you can see it. All right, let's skip to the next level. All right, here's a one that's a little bit more difficult. The cube root of 729. Why don't we try guessing and checking with this one? I like to find a range that our answer could be in. So we're looking for the cube root, the index is 3, of 729. Well, I'm going to start thinking what's going to be lower than this and what's going to be higher than this, right? So let's think about this. I know that 10 times 10 times 10, that would have a 1 with 3 zeros on it. That would be 1,000. And that's pretty close to this answer, but it's a little too high, right? We want 729. So I'm going to go ahead and try a number a little bit lower than 10. Let's try 6, because we just tried 5. 6 times 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36, and 36 times 6, that would be 36 and 180, so 216. So as you can see, when you're multiplying a number by itself 3 times, it grows very quickly. Between 6 and 10, you get from 216 to 1,000. So we know that this value, 729, is much closer to 1,000. And since it ends in a 9, that gives us a hint. Let's try 9 times 9 times 9. 9 times 9 is 81. 81 times 9, let's see, 1 times 9 would be 9. 8 times 9 is 7. That gives us 8 times 9 is 72. That gives us the 72, and then the 1 times 9 gives us the ones place. So 9 times 9 times 9, 9 times itself 3 times equals 729. The cube root of 729 is 9. Let's keep heading forward and see how our skill gets a little bit more difficult. All right. So if before the index was 3, now we have an index of 5, meaning we're trying to find the 5th root of 243. Now, when you have a 5th root, that means we're multiplying the same number by itself 5 times, right? Well, when we were multiplying the same number by itself 3 times, it was growing really fast. So even though this, what we call the radicand, what's underneath the radical, even though the radicand is very large, since we're multiplying something by itself 5 times, it's going to grow really fast. So let's try a small number first. 2 times itself 5 times. Let's see what we get. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. That's not right. Let's try 3. 3 times itself 5 times. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 27 times 3 would be, 21. That would be 81. And 81 times 3, that would be 3. And 8 times 4 is 24. Oh, look at that. That's 243. So look how quickly these values grow, right? 2 to the 5th power is 32, and 3 to the 5th power is 243. So what is the 5th root of 243? What number do you have to multiply by itself 5 times to get for 243? Well, that number is 3. You'll start to see patterns once you do several of these. So as you can see here, 3 we just did. We just said that 3 times itself 5 times was 243, right? So what number multiplied by itself 6 times? If we multiply this by 3 again, you'll see that we get 3 times 24 is 72, and 3 times 3 is 9. That's going to give us 729. So here you can see when we do 3 to the 5th power times another 3, well, that's the same as 3 to the 6th power, right? So here you can see how these numbers are all related. The 6th root of 729 equals 3, because 3 to the 6th power is how you get that. So it is a guess and check method, but once you start seeing patterns, you don't have to guess and check any longer. All right, let's try this one. Here you have the 5th root of a negative number. And remember what we said about negative radicands, the number underneath the radical. when you have an odd an odd index. So what number times itself 5 times is going to be negative 1,024? Well, let's try negative 2. Negative 2 times itself 5 times. Let's see what we get. We know our answer is going to be negative because we're multiplying it an odd number of times. A negative times a negative is positive, a negative times a negative is positive, but there's still a negative left over. So this equals to negative, let's see, 2 times 2 is 4, 8, 16, 32. That's too low. Let's try negative 4 because this is an even number. We know our answer is going to be negative. And let's see what 4 to the 5th power gives us. Right, and these are all negative. Right, a negative times a negative 5 times. We'll still be left with a negative. 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. 64 times 4. These 3 4s is the 64. And then we have 2 more 4s left over. 64 times 4 is 256. And then times 4 again. Well, 25 times 4 is 100. But then you have 6 times 4, which is 24. And there it is. Sorry, that got cut off a little bit. So negative 4 times itself 5 times makes negative 1,024. All right. Hopefully this video helps. And if you have any questions, you can reach me via the Remind app, or you can also reach me via